Hi, welcome to my channel, Math Made Easy with Laurel. I'm Laurel, and in this video we're going to take a look at percents for healthcare professionals. Previously, I produced 3 videos on percents, and they were named Percent Problems Part 1, Percent Problems Part 2, and Percent Shortcuts. So if you need to review the foundation of solving percent problems, I recommend that you pause and take a look at least the first video of those 3. In this video, I want to focus on the kinds of percent problems that you may see as a healthcare professional. There are different ways of solving percent problems, but what I like to stick with is this procedure where I set up a proportion. The percent goes over 100 and the amount goes over the base. So in your question, you will know 2 of these 3 things. Some amount is some percent of some base. And the reason I like this method rather than the shortcuts is this method works regardless of which value of these 3 you're finding. Most questions that you're going to encounter will be ones where you're either finding the amount or the percent. Typically, you'll know the base. Let's take a look at some examples. A doctor prescribes 80% of a 25 milliliter ampule for her patient. How many milliliters of the drug will the nurse administer to this patient? So remember, this is the way we're going to set it up. You're welcome to do a shortcut if you're comfortable doing shortcuts, but I'm going to stick to this method. Percent we know is 80%. So that number always goes over 100. Then we have to decide, is 25 milliliters an amount or a base? Whenever you see out of something, that when it's finding a certain percent of another number, that of number is always going to be the base. So 25 will be our base, and what we're finding is the amount. We want to know what amount is equal to 80% of 25. In order to solve this, we cross multiply. So you multiply along the diagonal. So 100 times x will equal the product of the other diagonal. So 80 times 25 is 2,000. Then in order to solve for x, we divide both sides by 100. So the answer is 20 milliliters. Let's try a question where we want to find the percent. In our next example, it says a patient is being given medication through an IV. The initial volume of the IV fluid is 1,500 milliliters. If 900 milliliters of the fluid is left, what percent of the original amount has been administered? I think that the biggest challenge working with percent problems is reading it carefully and answering the question that's been asked. You have to be careful here because you're told how much is left, but they're not asking what percent is left. They're asking what percent has been administered. So in this case, we're going to have to take 1,500 milliliters and minus 900 milliliters to get how much has been administered. Now we can focus on solving the question. They're asking what percent, so that's going to be our unknown. We'll call that x, goes over 100. The amount administered is 600. Out of the total, your base will be your total, so the base is 1,500 milliliters. We're going to cross multiply, so x times 1,500 will equal 600 times 100. Then we divide both sides by 1,500 to solve for x, and we get 40. So our answer is 40%. Let's take a look at some more examples. In this next example, it says a patient is prescribed a certain drug at a dose of 50 milligrams per day. The doctor decides that the dose should be increased by 20%. What is the new dosage? So there's 2 approaches that we could have with this problem, and I'll do the question both ways so that you can see and choose which method you prefer. We could find 20% of this dosage and then add it. So if we did it that way, and we set into our equation, percent is 20, so that goes over 100. We're finding 20% of 50, so 50 is our base, and we want to know the amount. So that's our x. We cross multiply, 100 times x will equal 1,000. Divide both sides by 100, x is equal to 10. That's not the new dose, that's how much the dose needs to increase by. So the new dose will equal 50 plus 10, which would be 60 milligrams per day. Again, make sure you're answering the question that's being asked. It asks for the new dose, so you have to add the amount that it needs to be increased to the original to get the new dose. The other way to look at this question is, if the dose is to be increased by 20%, that means you're going to be giving 120% of the original dose. So 20% more of what the original dose is, you add 100% plus 20% gives you 120%. So what we could do is find 120% of 50. In that case, 120 is our percent, that goes over 100. Our amount is x, our base is 50. Again, we cross multiply. Divide both sides by 100. And that gives our answer as well. If we took this same question and changed it to decreased by 20% rather than increased, again, we have two ways of approaching it. We could find 20% of 50 the way I did previously, and that was 10 milligrams. Then the new dose would be 50 minus 10, which would be 40 milligrams per day. The other option is to find 80% of the original dose, because if the dose is decreased by 20%, that means that 80% of the original dose must be administered. 100% minus 20% is 80%. So now we set it up, 80 goes over 100, that's our percent. We want to find 80% of 50. We cross multiply. We divide by 100, and you can see that we get 40 milligrams per day this way. So either option is correct. You decide what you're most comfortable with. Let's take a look at some more examples. A drug dose is decreased from 200 milligrams to 150 milligrams. What percent was the dose decreased? Often I see students just rushing in and plugging numbers into the proportion, but you need to take a minute to think about what they're asking and what they're giving. We know we want to find the percent, so the percent will go over 100. If we want to know the percent that the dose was decreased, we need to know the amount it was decreased. The amount is not 200, it's not 150. The amount will be 200 minus 150. So the amount that it was decreased needs to be calculated first. Now that we know the amount it was decreased, that goes in the numerator. Now we need base. We've got two numbers here, and it's important that you understand which number to choose. Whenever you have anything that's increasing or decreasing, the number that you have to use for your base is what the original value was. So the base is the original value. What did it decrease from? It decreased from 200 milligrams. So that's what we use for our base in our proportion. Now we can cross multiply and solve. We'll have 200x equals 5,000. Divide both sides by 200, and we get a 25% decrease. We use the same logic if it was an increase. So if we had a drug increasing from a certain amount to a certain amount, and you want to know what percent increase that is, you have to find the amount of the increase, and then your base will be whatever it increased from. One other area where you may encounter percents is with percent solutions. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of that. I want to talk about one of the most common ways of expressing percent solution, and that is weight per volume. So if you see 5% solution, and it might say weight per volume, or it might not. What that means is that you will have 5 grams of solute in 100 milliliters of solution. So if we're talking about medication, the amount of medication will be the solute, and then that solute is dissolved in solvent, which could be saline or water, to make a solution. So in terms of our proportion, the percent goes over 100, and the solute will be our amount, the solution will be our base. So we can use this to find any of these three things. So if you were asked how much medication is in 200 milliliters of a 5% solution, our percent goes over 100. So we know we have 5 grams. If it's 5%, it would be 5 grams in 100 milliliters of solution. We want to know how many grams or how much medication will be in 200 milliliters of solution. We can write this again without the units. So 5 over 100 will equal x over 200. Cross multiply 100 times x will equal 1,000. Divide by 100. And we would have 10 grams of medication in 200 milliliters of a 5% solution. Next example says there are 2 grams of medication in 40 milliliters of solution. What is the percent concentration? So percent is what we're finding. That goes over 100. We've got 2 grams in 40 milliliters. Percent will be x grams in 100 milliliters. We cross multiply to solve. So 40 times x will equal 200. And then we divide 200 by 40 and we get 5%. There's one more type of question that you might encounter with percent solutions, and that's where you're asked to find the amount of the solution. So let's take a look at an example of that. In this third example, we have 15 grams of medication in a 10% solution. How much solution do we have? So in this case, we know the percent, that goes over 100. We've got 15 grams of medication, that's the amount of solute. And we want to know how much solution we have, so that's our unknown. And keep in mind that the amount of solute is in grams and the amount of solution is in milliliters. So we have 15 grams in how many milliliters to get 10% or 10 grams in 100 milliliters. We cross multiply, 10 times x will equal 1500, divide by 10. We would have 150 milliliters of solution. You can see from the examples we've done, there's a variety of ways that percent is used in the medical profession, but every time I use the proportion percent over 100 equals amount over base. You can take shortcuts if you prefer, but make sure you read the question carefully and you understand what's being asked. As always, practice the skill as much as you're able to so that you can be competent and confident working with percents.